and participating remotely. Looking at the agenda, the first agenda item is Anna.
All right.
Do you want to give us a little
Yay.
special services report?
Yes, trying to keep a special services report little was a challenge, but there's a lot going on here. So this is my indicator report for the 22-23 school year. There were a bunch of people that participated in helping gather data for the report and information. So don't want you to think I was fully responsible for this. A lot of people dove in and helped out as with all things with special services. Our connection to the district mission, our department's purpose is really to ensure that all learners, regardless of their unique circumstances, can make progress and achieve in their education. Through our services, we reduce or eliminate barriers to student learning, and we strive to ensure every student feels a strong sense of purpose and belonging when they enter our schools. And we believe the work that we do with students today will strengthen our community in the future. This next slide really lays out our department. We have two main areas of our department. The first is special education services, and that's our largest. The largest amount of staff, the largest amount of students that we serve. And then the second area is student support services. So these include 504 nursing, coordinated early intervening services, which are tier 2 behavioral interventions, homebound, home-based services, mental health and homeless services. We're going to start with special education because that's our biggest area. This slide outlines the number of students that receive services through IEPs in the district or individualized education plans. We have 861 total students receiving services in special education. This is 21.4% of our student population. So it's a pretty significant number. That number has been growing over the past 5 years. Open enrolled, we have 212 students, and we have 649 resident students receiving services. And that's relevant to point out because we are really an open enrollment winner in special ed. We have a lot of programming that we think brings people to our district. We also have a care and treatment program, Itascan Education Center, which is part of our district that brings in a lot of open enrollment. So that definitely impacts us. Here's the breakdown of number of students receiving special education services per building, the total students, and then the percentage of students receiving SPED at each site. We have 175 total staff in special education, and the breakdown of where those staff are is depicted in this chart. One thing that's unique about us compared to other areas in the district is that we have several district-wide special education jobs. We have a lot of obligations due to federal and state statute around services that we need to provide. And a lot of these services look similar to a medical model. They're not exactly the same. So we employ a lot of services that we don't have a need for them for every building, but we have a need throughout the district. So that includes speech language pathology, school psychologists. We have around 2.6 FTEs of that. We have 2 occupational therapists. We have 2 physical therapists. We have special education coordinators. We have a deaf, hard of hearing teacher we share with ISD. We have an audiologist that we share with regionally with 4 other districts. We have a physical impairments teacher that we share with ISD. We have a brailleist. So I think there's a lot of specialized personnel that provide services to our students that people don't even really realize. And that's why I think it's important to depict it in the slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is our enrollment like compared to other districts our size with
Right.
SPED? Like, because I've always heard that we have a significantly high number of SPED, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah. Regionally and in rural communities, they're looking at about the same numbers that we are. When you look at the statewide average, there's a downtrend in the metro. And so that brings that statewide average down to 17, 18%. So we're a little bit higher compared to, you know, the state average, but in terms of rural communities, we're pretty comparable.
Okay.
Those communities, as I've talked with other directors and other leadership throughout the region, everybody's experienced an upward trend with COVID. Even the statewide numbers have significantly increased in the past few years, so that trend is happening statewide.
Okay.
And that's due to a lot of different factors. I think COVID is one of them. How compliance is operating at MDE is another, you know, I mean, there's just a lot of variables there.
Okay.
Yep.
Anna, do you even, I think with IASC, you know, we're
Very
It's-
comparable.
very comparable percentage wise in child count to IASC.
Yep. We are like surprisingly, you know, pretty even with IS.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting because the Northeast region of Minnesota is like the highest number of children with autism or something in the nation. Like it's known for that. Like there's something you
Yeah.
have to wonder, like, what, you know, what's that
Yeah.
about?
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a bunch of studies on that. So I was just curious if that.
So Anna, where are those 212 students coming from?
All over. So if you, I attached an enrollment summary, but we have local students, you know, we have a lot of give and take with our surrounding area districts. But we also, due to some of our care and treatment site, but then also some of our group homes. One thing that's also unique about Grand Rapids is we have several group homes in the area that provide care to students, and that brings in a lot of open enrollment as well,
Okay.
especially at the secondary level. Yep. All right. So like I said, having a brief narrative on special education was challenging, but we're going to do our best here. There's really three key ideas that we've been focused on, not only this year, but the last few years. So if any of these sound familiar, it's because they are. And we're really just trying to create consistency and routines and predictability within our department. I think it's really not a lot different than with students. I think that creates a sense of, you're fine, it's good.
Let's turn that down.
Yeah, I think predictability is always good in keeping people, you know, this is a hard enough job. We don't need to be adding additional chaos, right? So systems have been a big part of our work. Leadership has been a big part of our work, and really ensuring that our staff have the support to do the challenging work that they're doing have been our three main focuses. Ooh, uh-oh, there we go. So in terms of systems work, it's been really important to us to create a common mission. A few years ago, you know, special education is kind of one of those areas that a lot of people are telling you what you should be doing, right? Or what should happen. And it's, you know, our teachers were getting a lot of feedback from, you know, community sources, and it was hard for them to really prioritize the work, you know, what was important and what was going to drive student achievement. And really meet our obligations. So because of that, we knew we had to create a mission and create some clarity for people. So our mission has really helped us create clarity around our priorities. It has also helped us create alignment with our teaching and learning model, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. It's created common language and an understanding of the role of a special education teacher, because we noticed that district-wide, community-wide, there wasn't a lot of understanding about that role. And our mission also serves as a framework for making really complicated, complex decisions that don't have an easy answer. So as you can see, we have 4 key areas: belonging, advocacy, access to a full educational experience, and individualized goals and instruction. And really, again, like, I think for me as a leader, the best part of this has been every decision that we make, or when a problem comes forward, which is all day, every day, it gives us a way to say, okay, does our decision meet these 4 criteria? And if it doesn't, then we don't do it, right? And we keep working towards a decision that does. I did it again. I'm sorry, Julie. So again, we aligned with the teaching and learning model. There's direct correlations to what we do and they do. And what I explain it to staff as is it's really just a more specific version of the teaching and learning model. It's taking that special education role and focusing on the specific tasks of a special educator within that teaching and learning model. From that mission, last spring, our leadership team determined 3 goal areas for the upcoming school year. First, we really wanted to focus on the IEP process being followed as it's laid out in federal and state statute. This seems really simple. In truth, it's really complex. IDEA is a 1900-page statute. So if you just think about the complexity of that, it's pretty amazing. And then on top of that, we have a bunch of Minnesota rules and statutes that apply as well. And after COVID, a lot of those things were moving and shifting all through COVID. So we felt we just needed to get back to the basics and ensure our foundation was strong. We really wanted to build off of the district MTSS systems and ensure that we were using data to make objective decisions about our students. And collaboration with the IEP team has been a focus. We didn't, we talk about being siloed, and we did notice that in our own system, and it's been a real project to intentionally start collaborating. And I will tell you, working in a silo is easier in a lot of ways. It causes problems, but in the day-to-day grind, it's easier. So our staff really wanted to challenge themselves and work on collaborating specifically with general educators in ensuring that the classroom experience for our students with disabilities was meeting our mission. And then also with parents and really working to perspective take with parents and collaborate in a positive way. So these goals were communicated up front at the beginning of the school year, and we've just been reiterating them all year long, and everything we have done has aligned with those goals. So the second area we focused on is shared leadership. I know Matt's talked a lot about it, and we've just really embraced it and lived it in our department. We're 2 years in with our leadership team, and I really wanted to put our leadership team members' names up there because they have done so much work this year to share that load and help increase communication across the department. They've given excellent input on a lot of the decisions that we've had to make, and I'm just really, really proud of this team. We took this quote from Brene Brown, and a leader is really anybody who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and who has the courage to develop that potential. And I can say that everybody on this slide has done that.
I'll chip in and just throw Anna some kudos. She's done a remarkable job with structure and alignment and just in clarity for her leadership team. She's just done a really, really good job of that.
Based on the feedback they've given me, if you would have asked 2 years ago, they probably would not. So, but we've grown, and that kind of leads to this slide. If I could sum up this team in one quote, it would be, I don't know if you guys have read The Alchemist, but it's an amazing book. And there's only one way to learn, and it's through action. So everything you need to know, you have learned through your journey, and these people have committed to the journey. When we first started, we didn't know what we were doing. We fumbled. We had a hard time making decisions. Meetings were off track, but we've had this great cycle of them just having the courage to have a respectful, honest conversation about what could possibly work better. And we've just made micro adjustments over the last year and a half, and it's really led to, I feel like we're hitting our flywheel now. This list is also the list of things that we've accomplished really in the last year and a half. Because I can say that we didn't get a whole lot done the first half of 2 years ago because we were learning how to be a team. So we've set goals. We planned all of our professional development, which we're going to talk about in a minute, for the upcoming school year and how to communicate around it. We revamped my communication with the department. They've given me a ton of feedback over the course of the year of, if you did this, this would really help us. And I've had many people comment that that's been improved. So like I said, I appreciate the open dialogue and people having the courage to respectfully give input. We've created clarity around PLCs as they apply for special educators. We've restructured our spring transition process, so how we transition students from one building to another and from one case manager to another. And we did that through our leadership team and our special ed advisory council, which is our parent committee. David, you participated in that work. We set standards for collaboration with gen ed teachers in terms of what are we going to do to make this better. We addressed workload concerns with non-monetary solutions, and that's really hard to do when you're under stress and you have things coming at you all day long, to think, okay, you know, the white horse isn't coming, but we still got to work to figure out solutions, and this team has absolutely been able to do that. We've created systems of support around district MTSS tools and data collection for IEP goals. We created a plan and communication strategy for walkthroughs this spring. In partnership with the ESP Labor Management Committee, we restructured ESP startup training to create more efficiencies for communication and increase the likelihood that people can attend. We developed several due process templates, a goal bank, and support information for staff. And we worked on a process for individual due process support and coaching through some individual coordinator meetings. So again, through our trials, we've developed a pretty consistent process for implementing adjustments. And I don't want to say change, because a lot of times we're not doing large sweeping change. We're just making micro adjustments as we learn and grow and get better. So our process really starts with informing all staff and everyone affected by an adjustment and planning the communication with the leadership team. So I go to my leadership team and I say, okay, here's what we need to do. How do people need to hear this? And they give me a lot of great feedback, and depending on the topic, and I would say, like, my initial response is a lot of times not what they say or what I was thinking about doing. So I really appreciate that feedback. Then we communicate with all staff and gather input from all staff. This often happens through a Google form and a PLC. So then the SPED leadership reps go back. I'll send a department-wide communication. They go back to their PLC teams and gather input through that Google form. We then analyze the input, make a decision, and finalize our communication plan. Then we communicate again about the final decisions, and then we implement our plan and gather data on how we did. So again, our leadership process has really just been collective work of the department. Everybody has participated. So our leadership team has led to improved staff experience and improved student outcomes. The next area we're going to move on to is support for staff. One thing I thought might be helpful, and I thought of this after the fact, was just to take a look at our training and event detail. And again, this was work of the leadership team, but might be helpful to kind of summarize some of the things that we've been doing. We've put in evaluation support for teachers. Sue Dekich and Nancy Riley are two amazing retired teachers who come in and help us provide achievement testing to students, and it really takes a load off of teachers. We provide individual meeting support. So if a teacher is going into an IEP meeting that might be contentious, or they're not really sure how statute applies, they can ask myself or one of the coordinators to help. We have individual meetings with coordinators. We've done that 2 times this year to align coaching with the department level goals. So I'll give an example of that. One of our goals was around due process and really ensuring that we're following the process. So we took the sections of the MDE compliance checklist that we've been working on this year, and we did kind of a mini coaching checklist. So they go through, and every single teacher goes through an IEP with a coordinator to analyze how they did, and it's not reported anywhere. It's not, no individual data on the teacher is taken, but it's really just a coaching opportunity. And then it's also an opportunity for us to get feedback on how our trainings are going. So what we need, what's good, what do we have down pat, and what do we need to look at moving forward? So we do take data on areas that would potentially be cited, but they're not attached to teacher names. It's just systemic level data to make sure that we can plan our training around that. We have monthly PLC trainings with the department. We have new teacher benchmarks for their first 3 years that we've established. So in year one, you need to know this, and you should be able to do this by November and by March. And then we've aligned 5 days of new teacher training with the benchmarks. We have a full training calendar, which I passed out to you guys. And this was all just our proactive trainings, the ones that we set up prior to the school year. And a lot of these, you'll notice, are in partnerships with ISD. We knew we didn't have the capacity to pull these off all on our own. So Jackie Skelly, the ISD director, and myself worked together to really say, okay, can we align some of our practices and build capacity in our training? We have a full day startup training at the beginning of the year on the Monday of workshop week. We have a shared drive with information, training videos, resources for folks. We have 4 due process nights a year where teachers can get paid to come work on their paperwork and get support. I'm there, a coordinator's there to answer any questions they have. We provided Teaching and Learning Institute sessions for all educators on Special Education Law 101 and cognitive development. And then we've provided, and we've talked a lot about ESP training, so I won't go into too much detail there, but we've revamped our ESP training structure and collaborated with the ESP Labor Management Committee to do that. So in total, over the course of the year, proactively, and it doesn't count the number of trainings we've provided because somebody's asked us to come in and do them after the fact, but over 300 hours of proactive systematic training. So again, that's what you have. And then this is just an example of our shared drive. So we have everything kind of organized in folders. Here's an example of a folder. This one's for extended school year. So you can see it has a training video. It has a decision-making flow chart. It has example documents of IEP documents for teachers to follow. I know myself as a teacher, I was usually doing this work at 9 o'clock at night, didn't have access to people to help, but so this is what I would have wanted as a teacher, was a way that I didn't have to interact with a lot of people because,
The day's over.
Yep, the day's over. Yeah, you just want to get it done. But I could find the information I needed. All right, so any questions on special education?
It's amazing. I think
Yeah.
It's just awesome. And truly that people wouldn't be open and honest if you didn't provide a safe space for that. So that's hats to you as a leader. That's up to you.
What's been cool too is to see how Anna's used the feedback from her team. She shares that with me. And, it's one thing to ask, and I've, been guilty of it myself, but you can see the feedback that her team has given her. And then you can see the changes that have been made, like either right away or that following year. So they can see that she's adjusting her practices to meet their needs. So it's really, I think it just adds to their confidence too.
Yeah.
She's kind of the pace car for our team.
Some great work there, Anna. Really appreciate all the time and effort of you and your staff. Matt, just a broad question, and I know there's templates here, and thanks to Anna and her staff. Is this some of this template stuff that we could use in other divisions of the school district, other departments of the school district, via whether it be our regular teaching staff, whether it be our custodial staff, our food service, bus drivers, whatever, someplace where here's the template, here's the 3 or 4 things, 5 things, whatever. It just seems everything is all set up here, and it just seems too valuable not to use it in other parts of the district. And I don't know if that's feasible or not.
It is. And so, as we've been working on sharing leadership and having teams, Anna, like I said, has kind of been the pace car, I think, in terms of organizing this work. And the principals are at different phases of adopting this model. Some of them, I think, were like, this is really good, copy and paste, I'm doing this. Some of them are taking parts of it. Some of them over time are realizing that maybe their model isn't working as well as this. Some of them have things that they're doing, but Anna's been pretty open with that group about sharing this structure, because really the thing, and she's talked about this kind of more than I have, but just the more that you can automate some of these things, the less you actually have to think about it every time you're doing it. And I think that's something that's been really helpful. The agenda format that she put together early on is one that that meeting that we've talked about with our custodial and maintenance folks. We haven't had our first meeting on that leadership side of things there, but our agenda is structured after this model. So it is something that we can kind of copy and paste and adapt.
Well, I think that'd be great. I just, it's well cemented right now, and it just seems like we should be able to expand this out and to the other divisions / departments within the district. So again, thanks, Anna, for all the work.
You bet. One last thing to draw attention to in this shared drive is we do have a SPED leadership folder. So everything we do goes in there. We have the agenda, all the meeting notes. I actually even put the emails that I send to the leadership team in there. So they're all they're organized by meeting. So it's really creating transparency and also just ease of access for people, because sometimes you get an email and, like if you're doing 8 things at once, you might forget it. But I know I can always go back to the folder related to that time frame and get what I need. So that's another thing to point out too. And I think it's just, it just helps everybody in the department get involved. Okay, we'll move on to nursing here. So nursing, we have about a little over 10 FTEs here. We have decreased actually 2 FTEs in the past school year. My report last year had 2 more. One was a long-term sub-COVID nurse who was doing just COVID. We also had a district-wide float position. And what that position was from was when we combined the elementary schools going from 4 to 3, we had a nursing float to help support some of the additional load of the smaller elementaries, and that was a reduction last year. So we've been adjusting to that. Jamie Goodwin is taking over the reins for Angela Elhard this year as the lead licensed school nurse, and she's doing a really wonderful job. So I just can't say enough positive about her. So really all students in the district are impacted by health services, including my own kid who loves the nurse so much we try to keep her out of there. But, so that's I tell Tracy, just send her right back to class. But they have a variety of duties. They are responding to health needs as they come up. They're completing health assessments, providing vision and hearing screening, setting up flu shot clinics, immunization. They're checking immunization records, developing and managing med plans and chronic health plans, providing services to students with disabilities that are specific and related to their disability, and providing training on PCA cares to all ESPs and teachers that need to provide them. So that's a lot. And really in the past 3 years, this department was probably they were wildly impacted by COVID. Their jobs turned on their head to look something completely different. And they needed to shift a lot of their normal duties. Some of the mandates around what we have to do for health services fell away to make room for COVID. Well, those have all come back now. So we're just kind of readjusting to get back into normal operating procedures. So that's what we've been trying to do, getting back on track with immunization records and communication around those, vision and hearing screening. So we did our full vision and hearing screening this year in the fall for the first time in a couple years, because that was one of the things that kind of fell away with COVID, and really just managing those building operating procedures. And a full nursing report will be provided by Jamie Goodwin in May, so you'll get a lot more detail there. But this has been just a great team to work with. I can't say enough positive about their flexibility and adaptability over the past few years. Mental health services, we collaborate with North Homes to provide our school-based mental health services. We're in our third round of our contract with them. And this includes children's therapeutic support services and supports and day treatment. In the table, you can see the total number of practitioners and the number of students serviced through this. So this is our 7th year of collaboration, and our goals coming into the school year were really to increase the overall capacity so more students could access support. They're not immune to the staffing issues our community has had across the board. So they've had some challenges with that impacted us a little bit, but they really prioritize school-based services as well. We also wanted to increase access to therapy in school across the district, but specifically secondary, where we were seeing a really significant need for it. And we wanted to target the high school as a location to significantly increase access to services. So outcomes, we've increased our overall numbers from 274 students receiving services to 398 this year. So we have really built up that capacity. That's an increase of 124 students. We've expanded therapy to both the middle school and the high school. We were really targeting the high school, and North Holmes was able to find therapy services for the middle school too. So that's been a great addition, and really nice that students don't necessarily have to leave school to get access to their services. That creates a ton of barriers that this service really eliminates. We also added a second CTSS worker at the high school. And just on a side note, our staffing for Big Fork has stabilized. We did find a consistent staff up there. We have a little caseload going up there, so Big Fork is getting access as well. And I think it's important to note that this service, due to our agreement, is really provided at no cost to the district. So we provide space.
I'm glad you mentioned that. It's something that, and I'll talk in a little bit about the staff input that we took for budget reductions. And one of the ideas that came up was to eliminate services that we contract for, like North Holmes. But this is one that doesn't cost us anything other than just giving them a place to be. So there wouldn't be any savings by getting rid of this contract, and there'd really be no way that we could provide the service ourselves.
Well, and let's be honest, when we were running for school board, the biggest kickback on with all of our folks who ran was mental health
Right.
services. I mean, that was by
Yep.
far the number one
Yep.
complaint
Yeah.
by community folks. So this is,
That's why I think this is a great message that you increased that by 124. I mean, if we could get that out, because I know that is something that people
Yeah.
talk about all the time, but you've made great strides in that.
Yeah, well, and North Holmes has done a great job of prioritizing and getting staffing in here, and so they've really helped with all that too. And as with any collaboration, it's not without its challenges. That's just the nature of the work. And one thing you might hear is sometimes there's a little bit of delay if a student hasn't been accessing services to get started. There's a huge shortage of clinicians who can complete diagnostic assessments in our community, and that is impacting sometimes how long it takes to get services started. So that's not just an us problem, that's a everywhere problem, and it's really a shortage of people who can do that service. So and that's needed to be able to start services.
can I ask a question? And maybe
Yeah.
it's not the appropriate place to ask the question, but so let's say I, as a teacher or coach or whatever, have a child who asks for help, right? Need help.
Mhm.
But you have a parent who says no. Can they deny services for their child? And if they do and something happens, how are we not held liable on that?
Yep. So, I mean, the mental health service provided through North Holmes is, it's really intended to be proactive versus, kind of crisis intervention. And it is driven by parent consent, as all mental health services are. Really, our school counselors, our school social workers, and our school support specialists in that event would be the people to respond. Yep, to help kind of evaluate the level of risk there and make sure the student has access to the services that they need.
I mean, ultimately, it'd be similar to if
Yeah.
one of our nurses saw a kid who had a stomach ache, and our nurse told the parents, you should probably bring your kid into the doctor, and the parent didn't, we would have done everything that we're required to do. The parent ultimately is responsible for that medical care. It would be similar to that.
Yeah.
I mean, the place where we don't need parent permission is if there's in a kind of an emergency
Yeah.
situation where
Okay.
Yeah.
then they can step in and help right away.
Yeah, and they have provided support in that event, you know, in those emergency situations. And we have that in our contract.
I
with
was
them.
just curious because that showed up at MSBA. Somebody asked at one of the MSBA mental health ones. I was like, that's
Yeah.
a good question.
Yeah.
But the parents can refuse services, and
Mhm.
they do sometimes.
Is that-
Yeah. Yeah, and I think lastly, our work is really just bridging the gap between educators and mental health professionals. They're two really different worlds, and they're trying to coexist right now to provide the best support to students. And that takes a lot of communication and collaboration to pull that off that, you know, we're still working on and figuring out. All right, the next area is section 504. So 504 plans are formal plans that schools develop to give students with disabilities the support they need. It covers any condition that limits daily activities in a major way. These plans prevent discrimination and protect the rights of students with disabilities in school. And right now we have approximately 60 students that have 504 plans district-wide. And this number has slightly upticked, but it's been pretty consistent over the last few years. So what we have been working on in this department is we've really kind of taken what's been working in special ed and tried to recreate that here. So we're just in 504 in terms of creating resources and communication and processes. So we're really creating clarity around those processes and creating those systematic training opportunities. So one thing that we did this year was we established PLCs for student support staff. So this includes counselors, this includes student support specialists and our social workers. And we meet weekly for 1 hour to cover not only 504s, but any other training in any of the student support areas that they might need. 504 has been kind of our biggest animal to tackle. So that one we spent a lot of time on this fall, but really we do a lot of different things during that PLC time.
If I can jump in, part of that had to do with restructuring we needed to do with 504, who was responsible for that
Yep.
because of budget reduction. So that got pushed out to sites more and the people that Anna's meeting with.
Yep. So we identified 504 coordinators in every building, and that's mainly the student support staff. And then they are running point on a lot of the 504 plans in schools. So again,
And
go
a
ahead.
question in regards to the 60 that are part of the 504 plan, are those 60 part of the 861 total? Or is
nope,
that 60 above and beyond the 861?
those are 60 above and beyond the 861. 504s are a different statute, a whole different operation. So they seem like they would be the same thing. Going back to this slide, if you look at the visual here, we kind of think of all students in the district, right, as the large outer circle. And then we have some students that have impairments, but it doesn't impact them. It doesn't create barriers. It doesn't need specialized instruction. So we have a lot of students that fall in this category that we're monitoring or we keep an eye on, and they're doing fine in our school and achieving without additional support. And we do want to maintain that least restrictive environment for kids. And then Pat, to your question, the 60 students fall kind of in that third circle, students with substantial limitations, and that's where 504 plans fall. So these are students who might need accommodations to address the barriers that they're experiencing due to their disability, but they don't need specialized instruction. So the last circle, the white circle, is those special education services, and that's really for students who need not only accommodations, but they need curricular modifications or highly specialized instruction. Does that make
Well,
sense?
Yeah, yes, it does. Out of that 60, I would assume those are open enrollment students as well as 318 students.
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mhm. So one of the other things that we've been addressing this spring is really understanding our child find obligation. And this kind of goes back to Pat's question. You know, the line between 504 and when is 504 appropriate and when is special ed appropriate is really gray. So we've been navigating kind of when to know or when and if a special education evaluation is needed and working with our staff on how to identify those times. Our next section is homeless education assistance. And this is under the McKinney-Vento federal law. And we have 34 students receiving homeless education assistance. So the key areas that schools address is we are obligated to identify and report those students and monitor them once we've identified them. So monitor their progress in school. And we do that through our universal benchmarks and screeners. And the two main services is educational stability. So if a student temporarily bounces out of 318 due to homelessness, we are obligated to transport them to our district to ensure educational stability, which is really amazing for these kids because sometimes they're moving between 3 to 4 districts in just a couple months. So this really allows us to create educational continuity and that they get to maintain the relationships with the people that they're with.
The tricky thing in there's no, the state will say there's no geographical limitation to that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So when I was in a previous district, we were sending a van to Cherry to pick up kids, actually south of Cherry.
Yep.
And there's no money that, I mean, limited
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's very little money. We had a little bit of boost in ARP, with the COVID funds that were earmarked for homelessness. But other than that, there is like zero revenue. So that's that's the trouble with this statute. We do work on basic needs stability too, ensuring that they have hygiene products, access to their care. So making sure they can get transportation from one place to the next to access their outside cares and also, food. We do a lot to end the second harvest.
And just, you probably know this, but homeless as it's defined by MDE doesn't exclusively mean a student who literally, is without shelter. They could be couch surfing. They could be living with grandma temporarily. I mean, it can look a lot different than, what we usually think about when we think about homelessness.
Yeah.
So how's it determined on where the student should be going to school? Kind of back to your point, Matt, previous district, what prompt that district to go all the way to Cherry, south of Cherry, to pick those kids up and bring them to that district? It seems like there's districts in between there. How's it determined where that student should go?
They're entitled to go where they were. So they had been a student, if there was a student who had been attending here and then moved to, Swatera and was determined to be homeless, even though Hill City is right there, they're entitled to come to school here.
Okay.
Does the student make that decision?
The parent, if there's
If
a
the
parent
parent is
involved or
able.
a guardian ad litem or something appointed to represent the kid,
As I remember, you can kind of drop them when they receive homeless services in another district though.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. But yeah, it's, so they get to maintain the services through the school year, at the home, the district that they were in before they were homeless.
Right.
And then that goes through the school year. And then at the end of the school year, it restarts.
So then that student would enroll in Cherry in
Yeah.
the example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I want to point out with, the services we've been talking about here is these are all things that our counselors, our social worker, our student support specialists pick up as duties and things that they're monitoring and keeping track of, and ensuring that these students get their needs. So I just want to give a shout out to this group. They've been absolutely fantastic in making sure that, all of these areas get covered and covered well. They come to the PLCs, they engage, they ask good questions, they seek community resources, and it's just a really fantastic group of people. Speaking of fantastic work, we have kind of our coordinated early intervening services, and I laugh because this is like the little program that could, I don't know, it's, we've had our hiccups. We were mandated to set aside 15% of our federal special education funds 4 years ago due to significant disproportionality of American Indians being identified in special education under emotional behavioral disorders. You guys have heard me talk about this a lot. So we set aside those funds and put up this little program, which has been impacted by cuts a little bit each year. We've shifted whose duties it was. And so we have a few people that are being covered by these funds. Our elementary student support specialists all have a portion of that revenue covering their salaries. We have one student support ESP at the middle school. And then one of my special education coordinators, Amy Luke, and I both really help kind of cover the overall running and training of the program. We have 118 students who have received or are receiving a behavioral intervention this school year. So some indicators of success, and this is why I kind of laugh because this program has just been, like I said, it's changed a little bit each year. We've just been, trying to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But we increased our students getting access to behavioral interventions by 51 students from last year, which is fantastic. We've really just kind of, again, this is another area where a couple years in, we've hit the flywheel with figuring out how to get, as many students as we can, services as possible. We were not identified in a single area of disproportionality in the 21-22 school year. Not one. So I think we were cited over the previous 3 years, we were cited, between 4 and 6 areas. So to have none in the 21-22 school year was just a huge win. So we're officially out of significant disproportionality, which is fantastic. But since we've had good success with it, we can voluntarily set aside those funds. And that's what we chose to do for this school year. And this is lastly, our students in EBD programming or students with emotional behavioral disorders has decreased significantly over the past 4 years. If you look at the graph, you can see 2016, 17, 18, we had a really sharp increase of students getting qualified in that area. 2019 was the year that we put the program in place, fiscal year 19. We saw a good drop that year, a really good drop in 2020. We all kind of wondered if it was due to COVID, but we were able to maintain that then over the next 3 years. So that really tells us we would have, if it was due to COVID, what we've seen in other areas is we've seen a rebound in those qualification numbers, but we've been able to maintain that. So we've been just really happy with our results in that program. And again, it speaks to the work that our student support staff do. So budget and staffing implications. Kara helps out a ton in this area. Her and I are partnering all the time, and she just helps me understand this whole world a lot. We had a child count increase this year. With that, we saw an expenditure increase, but they're very much in alignment with the percentage there. Transportation costs increased significantly. And this was really, we kind of thought that lower number in the 2021 school year was due to COVID. That was the year that we were bouncing around in between learning models and having some different things happen. So we did see that expense rebound. The good thing though is transportation costs are reimbursed at a rate of 100%. So So if we're gonna have an increase, that's an okay area to do it. Our state special ed allocation was down because of our child count dip in the 2021 school year. So our numbers rebounded, but that allocation will rebound the year after.
Has to catch up with us.
Yep. And the percent covered by the general fund was consistent. We had some nice decreases there a few years ago, and we've maintained those decreases. One thing I want to speak to, though, is if you look at the percent covered by the general fund, it's not a true number of our cross subsidy. Our cross subsidy is significantly higher than that. We offset a lot of those costs by using third-party billing revenue. We do a ton. Our Amy Bean, our third-party billing secretary, is an absolute dynamo in there. She helps us capture every dollar we can. And if you ask any special ed staff, third-party billing is kind of a swear word. So like, don't mention it to them. It's a lot of extra work, but it does bring in a ton of revenue. So that really helps offset our cross subsidy. And then also special education benefits. A lot of people don't realize this, but in the state aid formula, in the option that we always end up under because of our dynamics, benefits are not covered in the special education formula. So that's one thing that we use some federal revenue, federal special education revenue to offset those costs. We use third-party billing, but we also use some compensatory revenue to offset the cost of benefits.
Which is a problem, which is a challenge in and of itself.
Right.
But then when you layer on top how expensive our benefits are, it like doubles down on how challenging that is.
Yep. And comparative to other districts, one unique variable we have is that we do provide a really good benefits package to our ESPs as well, which is great. It helps us get ESPs into the district. We don't have, nearly the extent of some of the staffing problems others are around that. But when you think about that formula, that does create an impact to our cross subsidy there.
Absolutely.
Yep. So some indicators of success, I think our systems work and leadership development has really laid a good foundation moving forward. We kind of feel like we're ready to dive into some individual programming and more specific areas of our department based on that. Staff support and development. This has been just a lot of fun, not only to develop. I love, this is just making sure special ed staff get what they need. As a special ed teacher, I was always kind of like, I don't know that I have all the tools to do this. So it's really nice. I enjoy that work, and the partnership with ISD on this has been fantastic. We've seen significant improvement in our due process indicators over the past couple years. They're the best that we have been, or that I've seen since I've been in this position, in terms of compliance with IEPs and that sort of thing. We have significantly more data present to help inform our decisions and programming and help inform IEP teams in making good decisions. And this is really speaking to the collaboration of, our work with teaching and learning and MTSS has been just a fantastic partnership as well. Our behavioral programming has been our main program that we really needed to dive into. We had a ton of really new staff in that program or in those programs, and all of our indicators are really trending in the right direction. Again, we have a decrease in number of students receiving service for behavior. We have a significant decrease in restrictive procedures across the district. And we have more exits from behavioral programming than we've had in the past. So that work has all paid off.
What I find interesting is listening to you talk about, when you run the process, right? When you trust the process and it's working, you can move kids, right? You can move the needle.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing in gen ed is almost the opposite. Like behavioral stuff is just going up through the, so if they're not in, right, some of the systems that can help process that, it seems like those numbers are going up according to what teachers are. Now, whether or not the data says that, right? I mean, you can't do it unless you look at the data.
Yeah.
But that's just a really interesting piece, because then what's happening there that's going so right? And what would we be missing on the other side of that?
Yeah. Well, and I think it really, I mean, I know I was only supposed to have 15 minutes. I feel like I'm blowing it here on the timeline, but
That's good information.
yeah. When we really looked at like, what do we need to do here? Who do we
Yeah.
need to hire? Because we
Right.
had a ton of hires kind of that were coming in that we had to make decisions about hires. But we looked at our data.
Yeah.
We said, what kinds of kids are getting restrictive procedures? That guides like what kind of background you're looking for,
Mhm.
we looked at really, what are the key things? And we read research. We looked at our data. I mean, what are the key things we need in an EBD teacher? What are our staff telling us?
Mhm.
If they're telling us something, we need to listen and, write that
Right.
down so
Right.
that we can keep track, because when 5 people tell it to you, you need to pay attention,
Right.
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 So I think we just, we really monitored the system for a year to kind of figure out what it needed, and then started plugging things in where we saw our data showed we needed it. But I think it goes back to, just looking at those systems and taking a step back and not taking it personal.
Right.
Right. That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
But I think, because we all are invested and we're all here because of our values.
Right.
So it's easy to, for it
Take
to
it
feel really
personally, like,
personal.
yeah, no, I'm good with this, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think I would add a couple things. And Anna can kick me under the table if I say something wrong, but we still have kids that will cause, really challenging environments in
100%.
special ed or not.
Right.
Mhm.
I think, Anna and I have had a number of conversations about, are we following the plans we have for these kids with fidelity?
Mm.
And when we follow the plans that we have for the kids with fidelity, the behaviors, we can manage those, right? Now, sometimes a kid will do something completely outside of what we would expect, and then it's a matter of what can we learn and how does the plan need to change. But generally, if as adults we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, it decreases the likelihood that we have a situation that's unmanageable. Would you agree with that?
Yep.
And I think the same is true in the gen ed classroom. When we're doing a really good job as adults with routines and structure and communication and those kinds of things, the likelihood of an unpredictable event or a situation we can't manage, the likelihood of that goes down. We know that kids can still come in ready to tip over, and we can't predict those things, but the likelihood goes down.
Yeah. And the thing I love about behavior, which not a lot of people use that sentence, but I mean, as somebody who taught emotional behavioral, disorders for years, I think one of the things is sometimes it's the simplest thing,
Yeah.
right? It's this huge problem.
Yep.
And it's creating a lot of chaos, but it's a couple minor tweaks and you can get things back on track. And I think that's the piece of, if I wish I could give anybody a gift in terms of like how to think about situations, it's the size of the problem with students that are experiencing challenging behavior doesn't always match the level of intervention needed. Sometimes you can have this huge problem that just needs a couple minor tweaks and it really gets the whole thing back on track. But it feels really complicated and it feels personal, and sometimes it creates chaos, which adds to stress.
Especially when we're starting from a place where staff are feeling stressed or they're
Yep.
exhausted or their buckets are kind of empty, right?
Mhm.
Back to the survey we're going to look at in a little bit. If people are starting from a place there, then back to what I said earlier, the ability to manage those environments or walk that plan out, sometimes that can be harder to do too if you're just in a place yourself that's a little empty. So it's complicated.
Yep. I know, our coordinators and we all jump in on, supporting behavior plans and coming up with how, what do we put in it? What are the strategies we use? But that's been a lot of work from that group of people too. The coordinators have spent a ton of time helping teams and training teams on individualized programs. Again, our partnerships and collaboration in district and out of district have just been an area we've been really focused on. Our collaboration with teaching and learning is the best it's ever been in terms of communication and making sure that we're moving in the same direction. And again, our amazing staff. I just can't say enough. You know, you can do all sorts of stuff, but if people aren't engaged, you're not going to get anywhere. And this staff has stayed engaged even when it's been really hard. And I think that just speaks to the values that they have and how amazing they are. And problem solving and conflict management. You know, we have a lot of that come up, but I am watching our staff and they are just handling it with so much grace, and they're coming into challenges and conflicts ready to learn and grow and perspective take, and they're really doing a phenomenal job. Some challenges we have, our specific learning disabilities numbers just continue to grow, and we're trying to navigate that. Sometimes that is an outcome of implementing MTSS. That's not uncommon. Once we have good benchmark data, good, you know, all of those things, that we aren't the first district to experience that. And typically after about year 5, those will trend down. So we're just kind of watching that and really thinking about that. We've been collaborating with teaching and learning on that as well. Despite huge growth in our indicators, just the need for due process support and making sure people have what they need to meet their obligations is huge. And the number of students requiring additional support through all of the services continue to grow. The number of students on health plans, which Jamie's going to talk more about, you know, 504s, you could see in all of those numbers, most of them are trending up. Changes for next year, again, we just want to continue to build capacity and collaboration with our area partners. We're looking at partnering on CPI training and new teacher academy. Those are two probably the biggest time consuming trainings that we put on. So if we partner on them and align our standards, that will reduce our need for training hours significantly. We need to reevaluate our staffing in a couple of areas just to make sure, as our EBD numbers are trending down and SLD is trending up, to make sure we have the right coverage. So we'll be looking at that this spring. We need to continue to build on our data taking practices. We've had huge improvements in implementation here, but we still have a long way to go. And we just need to keep working on 504. That's it.
That's just a lot.
It's a lot.
Thank you.
Great job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Kudos to you and the staff that you work with. It's
Well,
Pretty
it's all them. They're, you know,
amazing
They're-
people.
amazing, and the principals have been amazing partners, and teaching and learning have been, I mean,
Mhm.
I feel like I'm the person where when you pick up the phone, you know, I mean, because it's,
Oh, no.
I mean, it's the business office needs to help out, like buildings and grounds, transportation, everybody has just been really amazing in making sure kids get what they need, and I can't say enough about everybody. So. That's it.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on the agenda, item 4B, budget and reduction process update.
Right, just quickly going over some process items. As we've been saying all along, our goal is financial health and stability. That's where we need to get to. We're not there now. That's going to be our mantra. How do we get there? Todd did a good job of framing this for us. I shared it with all staff a few weeks ago. More funding from the state, more kids, reducing costs, and more funding from the community. Those are really the only 4 ways we get to that goal. And we can't cut our way. We can't just use one of these 4 bullets as our strategy. So far, we kind of have had to. And we're leaning into that again here with reducing costs this spring. So ultimately, we need more. We'll see what happens in a few weeks from the state. We'll talk about that in a second. And then leading towards what number 4 looks like down the road. The timeline where we're at, let's see here. See if it'll let me do this. This is the timeline that we've been working through So the grayed out dates are the dates things we've done so far as we've worked through this process, going all the way back to January. We held a meeting last Friday with principals to sort of review where we're at with reductions. We've got a preliminary conversation next week with principals about, or this week with principals about how does this play out when it comes to actual people or bodies and individuals and licenses and things like that. We'll meet next week with leaders from the union to make sure. I mean, a big part of this, we just want to make sure we get it right. We don't want to misstep here, even if it's just from a dignity standpoint, respect standpoint for people. Be meeting with you some more. We had 2 stranding meetings last year that ended up being really important because some things changed just in the matter of a couple days. And so again, we want to be accurate with this. The consequences of getting it wrong are just too big. Shooting for the 24th of March as our kind of like final reduction place. That gives us a little bit of breathing room there in case there's some tweaks that we need to do. We'll talk with principals and admin to go over notifications. What does that look like? We talked with, in our last meet, confer with our teacher group about how to do notifications this year. It'll be similar to last year. We made some small tweaks. There's no perfect way to do it. It's not news that anybody wants to hear. And again, just trying to do it in as respectful of a way as possible, ensuring people can maintain their dignity and also have the support they need from their union peers or colleagues or leadership, as well as the building and HR folks. So a week from then, at the end of March, that's when the letter would go out to staff, letting them know about the board action coming up. And then on the 3rd of April is when the board will take action on ULAs. That ensures that we'll meet our deadline, which is the 15th for teachers. And again, it gives us a little bit of time in there in case there's something that goes sideways. We've got a little bit of margin in there. And then we'll notify non-certified too in and around that time. So that's what the timeline looks like. It's on everybody's mind every day, and not just the administrators. I know it's on staff's mind too, and it's just a hard time. You know, we've got people doing their jobs every day, coming to work every day, doing their job, knowing that they don't know, and that's hard place to be. Which again goes back to the importance of our goal to be stable and strong. We've been meeting with admin and directors. I had a meeting with all staff a couple weeks ago, and was just tried to be very direct and concrete with staff. And that approach seems to be what our staff appreciates, just being very direct about where things are. I mentioned our ranges. We developed those, and those were really developed in January as we've moved our way through. We're probably going to be I'll probably be recommending a reduction in the middle of the range in that 2.4 or so $1 million area. We did do an input form for staff to give ideas. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And last Friday's meeting with the principal, we were sharing impacts. You know, it wasn't just this is this and that's that. It's, well, what does this mean? You know, it's important for all the principals to know if this changes in your building, what does that mean for your building? How does that affect students? How does it affect staff? And so just so, you know, if I'm in a different building, I can have a better understanding of that, what that looks like, what it might mean for our staff in the future. And some discussions then coming up with you, like I said earlier. I mentioned that 2.4 million. We're trying to keep the impact on students as low as possible. You know, the challenge with that is this is a $60 million organization with 600 people working here. There are a lot of people that aren't in front of kids every day that are needed to keep things going. And so that's challenging, you know, especially if you're one of the people that are in front of kids. We have a lot of people that make this place work. And so it's challenging, but our goal is to keep the impact as far away from the classroom as we can. It's just really difficult when we start talking about numbers as big as we're talking and that type of thing. We did, like I said, we did a Google form, asked people for some feedback. We had over 100 ideas shared with us. Over 40 people participate in that from 7 different sites. And so a lot of ideas. Some of them I'd never thought of before. Some of them are on the kind of, were on the list. Some of them made it to the list as a result of what staff said. Some of them are, you know, significant shifts. 4-day week, I'd say, is probably the mode. If there was one thing that was mentioned the most, it was probably going to a 4-day week. And so I think something definitely to think about for the future. If things don't go our way this fall, there are a lot of implications to that, of course. And many of the districts that have gone to it have gone away from it as soon as they could. Some are still with it. We have some north of here. I think Black Duck is on it. But a lot fewer. And usually what happens is when the budget kind of crisis hits schools the worst, we see an uptick in 4-day week. And then when schools rebound a little bit or operating referendums pass, we see districts come out of it.
Are there savings that, I heard a report today that said basically the 4-day week seems like a really good idea, but there's not as much savings as people anticipate.
There isn't as much as people anticipate. Transportation is the big one. You know, we're not running buses 20% of the time. So that's probably the biggest. You have some staff savings with people who would be here and are hourly serving kids. You have some savings there. Food service probably. ESPs, their days get longer. So, you know, utilities, if you can turn things down, but, you know, with our buildings, it takes a long time to go down and ramp up. What are some of the other things? One of the other, people see changes in how people use leave. Sometimes that's a valuable thing. You know, if you are off on Mondays and staff can take do their doctor's appointments on Mondays, that can help them save sick leave, but also us save on subs. So there's some benefits there. The days get long, especially when you're talking about out-state districts like ours, the 3rd largest school district in the state of Minnesota, size of Delaware. We've got kids on buses at, you know, 6:15, 6:30. All of a sudden that day goes from 6:30 till 5:30 by the time they get off that bus. So it gets to be a real long day for kids.
See, that's right. The 4-day, the ability for a local school district to determine 4 days, so you don't need permission from the legislature.
Right now you have to apply for it. Yeah. Pat?
Say, Matt, is it possible to give us some context on history? We've been in a cut mode for the last, 3, 4, 5 years? If we can go back that 5 years and this is what we cut 5 years ago, here's what we cut 4 years ago, here's what we cut 3 years ago, up to date, I think it gives some context for us as board members. It kind of puts it back in front of us, but more so to the community. And again, being home the last 2 weeks, you know, some discussion. I understand there's going to be some cuts at the district. I don't think people really realize in the general public on how much we've cut over the last 5 years. And I think we need to talk about that to just put it in context and show that this just isn't a 1-year deal that we're up against.
Yeah. We have that cumulative list and we'll put it in a form, maybe try to put it in a format that's kind of digestible, ensure its accuracy, and something we can put out there.
Yeah, because I looked back through my notes and it's like almost 8 million we've cut since I've been on the board. Very first year I was on, we didn't cut, but we had to keep it stable. And we determined what was above and below. And then from then on, we cut almost 8 million.
And I don't know if we could put alongside of that before we did the cuts on how much we were deficit spending. without cuts yet, because we tapped into our reserves for a few years there as well. And I think that in itself tells a story on where we're at, not necessarily why we're at, but where we're at and what transpired in years past and where we're at today. And I think it really adds credence onto where we need to be in November.
Agreed.
Yeah, I like that, Pat. The thing I would do on top of it though is like, we always thought that one cut would make us closer to coming out of zero and something would happen, right?
Right.
Contract expenditures, healthcare, steps in, I mean, all of those, like I said, even if we do nothing, it's still what, $350,000 increase in our general fund.
650.
$650,000 if nobody gets anything. So I don't think the general public understands that either. It's not that we haven't been cutting and thinking we're gonna get to a place where we have a balanced budget. It's that every time we do something happens, it's COVID, it's contracts, it's healthcare, it's, I mean, it's lower numbers for students. Now we're back up, but that takes a couple of years to catch up with us. And yeah, go ahead.
To that point, people are, the public is asking, where was the board in this? How come you didn't resolve this 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
And we thought we were. I mean, that was kind of the
we have
thing,
the
right?
answer, but we're not getting that story told.
Yeah, it was like, it's this, budgets are moving targets, right? Like it's predictable. Like we base budgets on numbers of kids we think are gonna come in, what money's coming in, how many positions we need. But, you know, Anna will say like, I don't know that I need an audiologist until the day school starts and all of a sudden I need to find an audiologist. And it's not an option not to find that audiologist.
Right.
So I just think that would be super helpful to tell our story, to be like, we kept thinking we were gonna get to, you know, we'll cut. In fact, I remember thinking, God, 3's a lot. Like 3 was a lot. And it's like, we all went, we can't cut 3 all at one time. Do you remember that? And it was like, we can't cut 3 all at one time. Well, let's cut 2, see where we're at the next year. And then maybe we can cut that next round and we'll get to 0. Like we'll balance it out. Well, by the next year, it was like, well, now you got to cut another 3. What do you mean we got to cut another 3? We cut 2 last year.
Well, I think there's a degree to which that's, I mean, there's a line between pushing things off to the future and being irresponsible too, right?
Right.
You know, the district could have cut $8 million 3 years ago. But would that have been the right thing to do for kids in classrooms and people? I don't think it would have been. So I think there's a fine line there. The metaphor that I used with in my staff presentation with the admin is, and maybe I did with this group, is that it's like a barrel that has a spigot coming in the top and a pipe coming in on the bottom. And if there's water coming in at a slower rate than it's going out the bottom, you're going to drain. And the challenge is this pipe that represents our expenditures wants to get bigger constantly. Like there's so many forces pushing that bottom pipe to get big, whether that's inflation or that's insurance or, you know, you can pick it. And so we're fighting that hole. And so at some point we need to be able to turn the spigot and make that wide open. Yeah. But I think to your point, your question, Pat, that we've done some work putting together some historical breakdown of positions by category. You know, we have some specifics, so we can put that together into a format that would be good to communicate.
And I would say, Matt, as simple as possible.
Yeah.
It's complicated enough, but back to David's point, as far as the community of trying to, I don't want to say make them understand, but at least make it presentable so that they can at least grasp it to a degree with some understanding.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and I saw Carol Kopp's on the meeting tonight. You know, I'm sure she has data around their membership speaks to the change in you know our teacher FTE.
If you're asking me if I have like a report on that, I do not. In fact, I just made myself a note. I would love to see whatever you have.
But it exists. I mean, that data exists somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next steps, these are some things that are in our windshield then. I mentioned already kind of where we're headed. This is kind of small, but it was on that other timeline I shared. I don't know if I can make this bigger, but the big thing is the next couple Fridays are big dates for us, and then leading to that April 3rd school board meeting is kind of a big one for us. That's any questions on the budget reduction process update?
Matt, if I could, I think the STARS report that we send
Yeah.
each fall would give you that FTE number.
Yeah, you're right. That would. Thanks, Ben.
Yep.
Okay.
Matt, what kind of wiggle room do we have? State budgets are not yet set. They're really squishy at this point. And you follow them, I follow them. And is there optimism there, or do we have to live with what we
Yeah.
best
So
predict right now?
we will be using, and again, this was strategic on our part to keep as much COVID money as we could.
Yep.
As long as we could, to keep jobs, to save jobs.
Yep.
And I think we've done about as good a job of that as we could. That we'll use $3 million of that COVID money this year to balance the budget. Next year, we'll use some more. That means that we'll be using, and I'll just use the number that we've estimated so far, going back all the way to January when we looked at our assumptions.
Yep.
If we estimated using $2 million of COVID money to balance our budget, we essentially are starting from $2 million down. So when we start talking about $2.4 million of a reduction, that's really just to make up for that COVID money that we're using now. So anything that we get in the budget from the state is just going to lessen the amount of COVID money we need to backfill our budget. It'll just mean that we're deficit spending less. So I wish that we were in a spot where I could say, if the state gives us 5, we can dial our reduction way back. We're just not. It'll just mean that we're deficit spending less.
Thank you.
And with all that said, I'll say, I believe that our approach of hanging on to as much COVID money as we could, even though there were people, I think, that were critical of that. I think hanging on to that COVID money for as long as we could, to be judicious with it, to save jobs, till that we get to a point where we're in a place with a referendum, was really strategic and really smart. I think that was good planning on our part. So, but it only takes us so far. And had it not been for COVID dollars, the $5 million between last year and this next year that we could potentially use, we would just be adding that to our reduction amount. So that's, that's a lot, but that's where we would have been.
Yeah.
So I think our work together to keep that COVID money, so we could save jobs and also do the things we needed to, of course. But I think that was a good choice on our part.
I think I would point, I've been asked a couple times, why are we doing the cuts this time of year? Why don't we wait until we know what the legislature
Yeah.
says? Well, I mean, we're kind of obligated. April 15th
Yep.
is our deadline. We need to know the cuts by that time.
Yep.
And sometimes I think the public doesn't know that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, there's two in the slide deck I presented to staff. There's really 2 reasons why we don't wait. It'll be too late by the time we know, and it won't be enough. That we know with certainty, but you're right. We have control in our contract with our bargaining group with admin. We have to notify people by April 15th. That's not a statutory obligation. What we run into with unrequested leave of absences is that process has to absolutely be completed by June 30th. And there's a significant number of hearing processes and notification timelines that back you up to about that date anyway. So the date is a good one to hit. Ours just happens to be contractual. So yeah, there's no way we wouldn't know what we need to know in time. Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, your administrators have been doing a good job. It's been gut wrenching. I know it's been hard. Mark, you made a comment when I was meeting with you that, we've been talking about people in the past. We're really talking about, in some cases, programs this year that we just won't have anymore. And some we'll add back as soon as we can, and some we may not if it's not a good fit for us long term. That's one of the good things about the pruning process, is it kind of makes you reevaluate what it is you're doing. And so there'll certainly be a time for that, and there will be I'm confident there's going to be a better day. I believe it with all my heart. There will be a better day, and we'll be building back. It's unfortunate that this is part of the reality of school district, life in Minnesota to some degree or other for most school districts in the state. It's sad that this is part of what we put our systems and our people through.
There could, there is like this whole educational piece too about how schools are funded. And I know that it's super complex. I'm looking at that, like it's big. But understanding just the funding formula and the tax base that it's based on and the inequity in rural versus metro, I think is super informative, because most people don't understand.
Right.
They do not understand that there is an equity issue between rural and urban school districts. And that often the argument is, well, it costs more to live in the cities, so therefore teachers there get more in a salary. Well, that's a joke. So now you're just enticing teachers out of rural. I think it would be super beneficial to start having that conversation, and it probably goes back to communication pieces, but I'm just thinking the chamber members would be a great place to start to have that conversation around the inequitable funding streams, and then the stress that it puts on local taxpayers, the way that it's currently structured, would be helpful.
Speaking of legislative inequities, letter C, if I can, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
Did you like that transition there?
I do.
I'll share a couple of things with you, some of which you've possibly seen. These are in your folder as well. I have a bill tracker here that's specific to 318 bills. And I think, let's see if it lets me do this. So starting with Big Fork, I'm not sure if everyone heard, but Senator Grant Housechild got our Big Fork bill in the Senate bonding bill, which was a giant surprise.
That's so awesome.
And he called me Friday. I mean, he's very personal, and he called me on his way home to Duluth or Hermantown for the weekend, and wanted to tell me in person. So that was really cool. And he had to do some work to get it happen. And so I'm grateful for that. There are a lot of things behind the scenes still. Our Big Fork bill's not in the House bonding bill that was approved, or that was ratified by the House. It is, I think, worth noting that Scraba and Spencer Igo both voted for that as Republicans. That was, not necessarily the Republican position. Davis did not vote for that House bonding bill, but Scraba and Igo did. So certainly appreciated that. The Senate, there's a big back and forth about a tax bill that they're interested in getting done, Social Security kind of tax too, along inside of that. I think there's still speculation about when that Senate vote could be on a bonding bill. If or when that happens, the Democrats have some options if that doesn't happen or if they don't vote to approve it. I think with all of those unknowns, the one thing that I think is good is that having a Democratic author in the Senate, have that in the Senate bill helps us. Even if there's no bonding bill, I think it could help us if there's a cash bill. So it's probably, the best of a bad situation maybe. Pat, I don't know, you've been kind of in some of those conversations too, that I've been a part of through Rams or whatever. Anything you'd want to add to that, or anybody else for that matter?
I sent you a text this morning, Matt. I talked with Farnsworth this morning after sending a text to him and Senator Eichhorn about supporting the bonding bill in the Senate. And Farnsworth basically said, I support it, but I can't vote for it. There's not enough votes in the Senate to pass it, so I'm better off not to vote for it with hopes of bringing more projects back to the Iron Range. I said, I get it, I understand it. Just keep in mind, our project is, even though it's not directly in your district, but you represent part of 318 as well as Senator Eichhorn. We appreciate any support that you can give it if and when it happens. I would just say, David, Mark, and Melissa, when you go down on Monday, try to make a point to get to House Child and thank them. I would say the same, get to Scraba, Igo, as well as Listlegard, and thank them as well for voting for the bonding bill on the House, even though it doesn't include our Big Fork project, but that doesn't mean it still can't happen through some negotiations for us. So again, I think they'll appreciate the fact that you stopped by and just thanking them for it. And I would say some polite pressure on Eichhorn and Farnsworth going forward. So
He took the time to give me a jingle this morning too, and I really appreciated that. I mean, he's a busy person, and he wanted to call and explain his position similar to what Pat said, and I appreciated that. And I think when we talk about a number of our legislators, they're in unique positions. House Child and Liz Lagarde, I think, are in a unique spot where they're representing the range and they're members of the Democratic Party, and that opens them up to criticism from a couple different fronts. So yeah. So anyway, I think what Pat said there, through negotiation, I think that's going to be our best spot. The thing that we're working out in the background then, Lauren's working on a meeting with Minnesota Management and Budget around this bonding piece, because there are, the good thing about it is it's state money. The bad thing about it is it's state money, and there are strings attached, and who owns that piece of the building that the bonding would pay for matters. It probably can't be us. And so we'll have to work through some machinations and to make that work. So some conversations with Big Fork City coming up relative to that too. Southwest bonding bills, they've both been introduced, not in the House, not in the Senate bills. I don't have a lot of optimism for both of those. Davis doesn't believe in bonding, so that's that. Same with cash. I'm not optimistic about that, but we'll cast wide nets. I did submit for the let's see. I'm trying to think of what the new name for these things are called. Community directed appropriations, or they're earmarks that at the federal level with Klobuchar and Smith and Stauber. So we'll see what happens. If we hit on one of these things, it'll make a difference. So I think as exciting as our students bill, and in your folder, I put a link to the YouTube piece. Our kids sat down there and they gave it they nailed it.
Mhm.
They testified in front of the House Finance Committee. They had data. This is why you should support this. They gave personal stories, but it wasn't just personal. It was data to back up what they were saying. Just amazing. And they've done all the work. I mean, they literally, if they met with Tim Strom, the drafted the bills and met and did running around meeting, getting things authored and jacketed, and just remarkable. It's just remarkable. So they've done a great job. And, you look at who is even authoring these bills. I mean, Matt Norris is out of Lino Lakes. The other four, Icorn, obviously we know, but it's really, and when the day that they were down testifying, that's a different day. They testified last week, and the week before they were down with the FFA day and all over the place, and they were getting swooped up, like just gathered momentum during the day. Somebody would hear about it, and they're like, "Oh, you got to talk to this person and set an appointment, and then go over to this building." And they were living it. So I'm proud of them. I'm glad, just excited for them, and what a cool thing.
Is there any way to put that, like, ask WDIO or somebody to come?
Yeah, maybe.
Because that's like a rural, it was like
Yeah.
the first year of that rural urban, wasn't it? Like
Yeah,
an
this is the
institute,
first-
it's
yep.
Like the pilot.
It's the
year,
first
kind
thing.
of?
Yep.
Yeah.
This is a unique opportunity.
Yeah.
It started, Joe Nathan from the Center for School Change at the U called me, and he's like, would you ever want to do this? And I was like, sure. And it just was really organic.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of turned it over and got out of the way. So it would be an interesting
I
story.
just think it would
The
be
fact
really
that there's
cool.
they got this far. Yep. Yeah. And they got good feedback from the chair of the finance committee. She was really appreciative. So anyway, that's in the tracker as well. The other thing that I put in there is just kind of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 legislative priority thing. I've shared this, I think, in the past too, but that's in there if you want to grab that. I don't need to go through that, but it talks on the front about our bills, talks on the back about some things relative to the other districts in the state. A lot of what Anna was talking about tonight with our student support folks, counselors, student support professionals, CEIS people, mental health, all those people can be paid for out of safe schools. And so I'm hoping that gets the attention that it deserves, and that there's more information in the bill number on the back of that sheet too.
Is safe schools, in your perspective, higher priority than cross subsidy?
No. The cross subsidy, the dollar amount's just so big. You look at the dollar amount for Grand Rapids School District, our cross subsidy number is 3.9 million. The governor's proposal is 40%, I think. So that's a $1.6 million deal. That's about the same as 5% for us. So that cross subsidy would be huge. And that, that's money, that's money again, that helps backfill deficit. So that's a pretty big priority. Mm-hmm. And the legislators that I talked to, the days that I've been down there, everybody's talking about cross subsidy. Everybody, Republican, Democrat, everybody's talking about it. So I think there's broad recognition that it's an issue.
That's a warm fuzzy.
It is. Yep. On the back of that legislative priority sheet, the bottom, I talk about the food piece, and just about every legislator asked about that too. And it's a challenging, and it's a hot potato topic, because it's hard to bring up being opposed to a bill that feeds children. It's politically a warm fuzzy for sure.
Yep.
It looks good on a campaign slogan, and it looks terrible if you vote no, right? Like you voted no to feed children, you're a monster. But I heard from a number of them that they're trying to understand this complex school funding environment we live in. I've heard Democrats and Republicans say, I can afford to pay for my kids' lunch. I don't mind doing it. I want kids that need it to have it. And to me, and we were in a meeting today, and this came up, and Carol said, I'd rather have that money to buy pencils with. And, you know, I see that everywhere, in every school where teachers are forking out their own money to buy stuff. And I'd rather have that money for things like that. So it's challenging, and it sounds like the solution that they've come up with for the issue that it creates with filling out these forms that affect our free reduced, which cost us $2 million the last time people didn't have filled forms, is to say, freeze it, give them whatever they got last year and deal with it in a year. Well, that's not a solution. It's just, yeah, it's kicking the can. It's, you know, Wimpy from Popeye. Pay a Tuesday for a hamburger today, literally. So, I don't know. That's a challenging one. The Safe Schools one, yeah, it's not as high priority as the cross subsidy. It should be. I talked to Sam Walseth, and I'm like, Sam, why is this not a layup? And he said, nothing's a layup down here. And what also was surprising is that the first draft of the bill was 100% drafted 100% wrong. Like the math was all wrong in it. And I was like, how is this? How did he sent it? Sam sent it to me, and he's like, can you tell me what this means? And I'm like, no, I can read this 3 different ways, and the math is wrong on all of them compared to what we're being told it's supposed to do. Here's what I think it should spell. Here's what I think they're trying to say. And sure enough, it was drafted wrong. And I don't understand how.
That is a lot of the beef with this current session, is there's not a lot of actuarial notes attached that have been certified to the bills that are coming. So they don't really know the true cost.
Yeah.
Like you're guessing even with an
Mhm.
actuarial note, but at least if you have a current actuarial note attached to the bill, you have some
Yeah.
sense of what it's going to cost.
Yeah.
If they lack those.
Well, I could handle if they didn't even have the cost, but the formula they were using was like algebraically wrong. Like it literally was algebraically wrong.
And that offends you as a former
It
math.
offends me.
Is
I'm
that
just
a
like,
lot, bud?
jeepers, yeah. It's just like, come on. I don't know. It's just a little bit alarming. This is a little bit alarming.
Just a little
Like
bit.
this was introduced. It's jacketed. It has a number, and it's like
Like,
algebraically
it's like
wrong.
more than one person looked at it.
Yeah,
I mean,
more
that's
than,
the
yeah,
thing.
wasn't
It's
like more than one person looked at it. Nobody went, this doesn't seem to make sense.
Scary.
One thing that information I'm gonna give you, well, I need to spend some, so I'm gonna like circle back to budget reduction for a second, just to talk about enrollment. Sorry, I realized I had this stuff sitting here.
Thank you.
I'll bring it up so you can see it, Pat and Ben. So as we're working through the reduction process, thinking about implications of it, one of the things that we obviously look at is, well, what is the impact of this on class sizes? What are the impacts of this on sections? And so we've spent quite a bit of time, and it's a little bit more nebulous at the middle and high school because those are really driven by the schedule, which is kind of driven by registrations and other things. At the elementary, it's a little bit more straightforward. So let me share this.
It's in your folder as well if they want to.
Yeah, this is in your folder as well,
Oh,
Pat, and Ben. You want me to do this?
Not in that, David, but in the folder, the Google folder for
Oh.
Pat and Ben. It's in that too, but then you can see it closer.
All right. So what this is an examination of our 3 in-town elementaries and the movement in and out of those, or who the kids are that are attending these schools. And not having been here when the boundaries were set up for these schools, this has been a little bit of a learning experience for me. I know where the boundaries are. I wasn't a part of discussions about how or why or what the commitment was to those things, but I wanted to at least look at who the kids are that are attending these schools now and what they've become. So for instance, in this West table, you can see this is just next year's grades 1 through 5 because we don't know anything about next year's kindergarten. So it's this year's K through 4 transferred to next year's 1 through 5. So you can see at West, for instance, in grade 1 next year, if everything stayed the same, one of those kids would be from Big Fork, 8 of them would be within the east boundary. 8 of those kids at West would be from Cohasset territory, 57 from West. Open enrollment would be 11. So that means within 318, 17 of the kids at West are from non-West elementary school boundaries. If we take out the open enrollment from that particular grade, so 85 kids total minus the open enrollment, the 11 kids, 74 are basically the 318 kids attending West. And that net transfer represents if I took all the kids out that weren't West kids and put the kids from West attending other buildings back in West. What does that mean? Like if only West kids were
Went to
attending West, what would that mean?
Yeah.
So it would be 69 in first grade. I'm gonna explain all this to you, knowing that there's a lot here to digest, right? And you'll need some more time for it. So you can see this is laid out across the board. You can see one of the things I think, so at West, if you look at that lavender column, I guess, 97 kids at West are from non-West 318 school boundaries, all right? They come from Big Fork or East or Cohasset. What I wanted to determine is if the challenges related to sectioning that we have created or will create are internal, like what's going to be the solution or part of the solution. So you can see that at Cohasset, similarly, 31 kids are from East, Cohasset, or East, West, or Big Fork. You can see the net transfer numbers there as well. East, similarly. So down at the bottom, you can also see a couple other boxes there. On the left, kids transferring out of the schools by grade. You can see by grade the number of kids that are leaving those buildings. And then you can see that net transfer, again, that 8 for East and first grade. That's if we took all the kids that left, all the kids that came back, where would they be? So East is +8. They've gained more kids than have left East. Again, not open enrollment, just internal. Cohasset, you can see, -38. They lose more kids than they get to other schools. So this is a lot to digest, I understand. Is there any questions that you have about this structurally, knowing that you'll probably spend some more time looking at it? It's like what you're looking at.
I would just comment that a lot of this would not be an issue if we were grade level schools.
Yeah, right. Yep. Sectioning would be way easier if we were grade level schools. That's 100% true. If we look at this, then let's see if it will let me. Pat, did you see it change? Are you looking at a different screen now? Okay. So this is what next year would look like if we didn't do anything. Same number of sections, estimating kindergarten, that kind of thing. And you can see there are pinch points in here just already as we
Mhm.
look at a huge, I mean, I should say huge, but you know, next year's third grade is one of the biggest grades in the whole district. So we already have some section problems in there. And again, we're looking at a box. We're looking here at 63 sections between Cohasset East and West, knowing that if we're going to make reductions of 2.4 million, that number has to be smaller, right? So how do we go about doing that? Again, trying not to make class sizes unmanageable or as, you know, as manageable as possible, knowing that, you know, we have this net interesting in and out. So the principals and I have met and talked about this, and what's clear is we can't make reductions really out of this without changing how many kids are attending these schools, right? So then it just becomes a matter of who has to go somewhere else,
Right.
right?
Right.
Are these interdistrict transfer students or intra-district transfer students that we kind of just looked at, or are these open enrolled kids? And in one of our meetings, one of the elementary principals that was here during that boundary discussion, he said, you know, I remember those conversations. And the idea was that we would use open enrolled students to balance these sections out.
Yes.
That hasn't really been, it could be because it hasn't been an issue. It hasn't been happening.
But that was the
To the
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's really good for me to know too, as we kind of process. I want to share some things that I've observed with you, and maybe just kind of leave that with you. And then hopefully this will let me share this screen too. Trying to figure out how to do this here. One of the things that I observed is that these boundaries, the boundaries that were established are pretty darn good. If you get to looking at this, East and West schools are pretty balanced.
Yeah.
Even after 4 years. They're pretty well balanced. If you look at kind of, if you take the movement out,
Yeah.
they're pretty well balanced. So at least in my opinion, those boundaries aren't the problem. My other opinion, based on looking at this, is that eliminating interdistrict transfers won't solve the problem because it essentially just makes Cohasset smaller, and that makes the problems at East and West bigger. So eliminating those altogether, because that was one of the things that were like, maybe we just say nobody moves. You got to go where you, and that may be part of the solution, but a universal, like nobody's moving around as much. I think last week I was like, this might be, it won't fix our problem because it'll ultimately make Cohasset smaller. As I've looked at this some more, and again, I'm just kind of giving this to you tonight to think about. I think what we need to do is establish some class average caps at East and West and Cohasset. So for instance, they could look like 25 to 26 in K2, 28 to 30 in 3-5. I'm just putting numbers down. I think we could probably tune those up. It could be 24, it could be, 29 up in the uppers, but, and one of the things that I think is, a reality, we're not talking about class sizes that would be our preference per se.
Right.
We're talking about class sizes that we have to live with right now. Knowing that we have to take developmental things in mind. And that we're not just talking about class sizes here. We're also talking about class sizes at our gyms, and we're talking about class sizes at Grand Rapids High School changing. So that's the context there. I think we need to establish some open enrollment placement guidelines and really intra-district transfer request guidelines as well, and then get information and place people based on that. So, and the reason I'm bringing this to you is because at some point I'm going to ask you to like weigh in on this and approve it, because it'll ultimately drive what we do, which will be important when our enrollment department is getting calls from people that want to do something different. They need to be able to say, this is what the board decided, so that it's not their decision to make, people mad. Some things when I think about this, and I've done some research looking around at some other districts too that deal with this. Obviously, any of this movement is predicated or based on if we have room. Like if there's no room, you can't. We're not going to let you move, and we're not going to, if you're an open enrolled student, you're just not going to be able to come here. Have you lived here before? Do you have siblings here? Is your parent work here? There's some of those things that I think are important and are reflected in other policies as I look to. Some of it has to do with just the practical nature of when we talk about staff, having their kid attend a school that's across town from where they work, they may not be able to get to their job in time. So sometimes it's not just about convenience of having your child in the same room or in the same school. It can be just about the practical piece of having them be able to be at their job on time. Pat, you have your hand up.
Yes, just a quick comment. Obviously, we need to get balanced. With that, whenever these guidelines get finalized, Matt, approved by the board, I think two communication pieces. I think it would make a good topic of conversation for one of your YouTube, Facebook live presentations. And then I think reaching out to ICTV and asking if you could come in and actually make this a talking show, whatever, so it's discussed on ICTV to the general public and more so the whys behind it, so that the general public has some understanding behind it and why we're doing what we're doing.
That's a good idea. So again, just kind of in draft form, my musings, I haven't run this by anybody yet. So, I mean, like you're the first audience. I didn't run it by Ryan or anybody in enrollment yet or Kara. So you're getting to see this for the first time. So just something to be thinking about. This is an idea. This is similar to what you might see in a metro district that has multiple schools. That's one of the things that's unique, right? Like we have multiple schools. Not all our neighbors have that. East and west aren't that far apart. Cohasset is not that far apart as the crow flies, really. But anyway, kind of looking from highest priority to lowest. One of the things that I think people could be struck by based on what I've laid out here is that resident student applying for an intra-district transfer being lower priority than an open enrolled student. I think the thing that we have to remember is that resident student has a school they are attending in the boundary where their parents live.
Yep.
And there's a philosophical decision that has to be made about open enrolled students versus resident students. And I think especially when we're talking about situations where budget is an issue, getting open enrolled students or maintaining open enrolled students, I think is important. So, if our open enrolled students, you can see on the sheet here, if that number of open enrolled students wasn't attending here, our budget would be exponentially worse. So anyway, this is just draft. This is just like I'm tossing it out there at a work session for you to look at. We can talk some more about it next week. But I think at some point it would be wise for us to land in a place where we could say, this is how we're doing it. You may not get the school you want, unless you're living within the boundaries. I think, you know, if you live in the Cohasset boundary, you're going to be able to attend Cohasset. If you attend West, you're going to be able to attend West. We'll figure that out. But if you attend, yeah.
I'll raise my hand. I didn't use the thing, but on the counter side, 318 could close grades if there was no room for non-resident students.
Correct.
But we couldn't do it to our resident students. So there's a flip to this, that we're in control of placing our resident students before non-residents. That's
We're, yes, in the school and their attendance boundary. Or I guess if we had more kids, you know.
yeah, we
Yeah.
could just shut it down,
Yes.
you know. So it goes both ways is my thought.
Yeah, I think the question I was posing was, if I live in the west elementary boundary and I have a third grader, but I'd prefer them to go to Cohasset, do I have priority over an open enrolled student going to Cohasset?
I think
If there's room.
if there's room, I guess that's where it comes in the policy
Yep,
of
Yep.
and make the rules there.
yep,
And then it's because, you know, it's not always good, it's not always bad times.
right. Yeah,
And that would address the resident over non-resident.
yep.
So,
Yeah, I don't think we shouldn't make a decision on this tonight because it's
no.
new to all of you, but wanted to put it out there for you to think about.
So when these were originally designed, one of the really intentional pieces that went into it was a balance on free and reduced. Like when we drew the boundaries. The
Yeah,
other piece of that was not making one school superior to the other. Because we had that with our previous elementaries, where some were seen and had access to things that other elementary schools didn't. For example, the arts programs and chess and some other things that one school had access to that other schools did not. And the last thing we wanted to do was create inequity in the new schools. And that was really intentional. They worked really hard to do that so that, and I'm just gonna pick, so that a doctor couldn't say, you know what, I work at the hospital, I want my kids, so that West doesn't turn out to be all the places where all the healthcare professionals' kids go to school. You know, it was like that, we didn't want that to happen. And so it was really intentional around setting those boundaries and holding them the best we could.
I've heard that. If I look at a map from a socioeconomic status, I don't think that geographically where those schools are accomplishes that.
Right.
No. I think they would have needed to be in different locations where the boundaries would need to look radically different.
It was
In
pretty
order for-
challenging to find
Oh,
other sites, yeah.
And I'm
those
not,
two large sites were
I'm not being critical
Yeah.
of where the schools are. I'm just saying that I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's realistic on that socioeconomic piece that we're gonna be balanced.
But that is kind of why you see the dip into Harris Town. Like, I mean, that's where you start to see the far dip into Harris Township for the east, rather than what used to be like the south side went to southwest, you know what I mean?
But if you look at
All
the
of
rest
that,
of East,
You know, if you went, yeah, but
you
I
look
mean,
at the
that's,
rest of
but
it.
that's why you start to see some of the radical shifts that it's
Mhm.
like, oh, that was an intentional piece.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And a lot of the growth in new homes and young families have been in that space,
In the,
in that east side, which is, you kind of see that in the numbers a little bit.
So if you were to set like an enrollment policy,
Mhm.
would that be something that like annually we would look at caps
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
priorities and whatever
Yeah.
and update that as needed?
I think we'll need to do that.
Mhm.
And if we went to grade level, that eliminates that need to look at that annually.
It does. Really, the only thing, well, we'd be managing it between Cohasset and then in east
Mhm.
and west. We'd be managing it there. But it would be a lot simpler.
The predictability
Be
starts
way
to
higher.
so even for parents, your predictability around what school you would
Yep.
go to would actually be higher in a grade level than,
Yeah, 100%. It'd be 100%.
because you would know, right? It wouldn't be a question on,
Yep.
you know,
You'd know if your kid was in second grade and you lived in town, what school they go
right?
to.
And I
It'd be-
say that because I lived in a space where my neighbor went to Murphy, across the street went to Southwest, and the other one went to Forest. And it was just like, well, where's my kid gonna go?
Mhm.
You know? And they were
Mhm.
like,
Big
well,
Fork.
we didn't really know.
Yeah.
And then they couldn't say that both kids were gonna be at the same place, or, you know,
Yeah.
and it was like, what? Like that became really unpredictable, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, and so I made different choices.
Mhm. Yeah.
Based on that.
Mhm.
Definitely grade level buildings would help with that. Okay. The last thing then, staff well-being survey, stress and well-being survey. It went out in October/November. We had a high percentage of staff completed, 61. I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
The Northeast Service Co-op got a grant. They have an individual that's hired with a grant that we have access to. This report's very thorough and deep. There's a lot to it. You almost can't read it in one sitting. We brought it just today, actually, to the district labor management committee. And because I had some conversations about, you know, where does this work get sort of like, you know, talked about or done? Is this a wellness committee thing? Is this a labor management committee thing? We started with labor management just because there's representatives around that table from every employee group. I think the wellness committee has a role in this, but we're going to start there and try to get together a ad hoc brainstorming/planning committee to take a look at this and hopefully bring back some ideas for some action steps and who else we need to engage. So wanted to share this with you. We do have a plan to get to work on it. And I think we should be able to access some more resources from the service co-op because of the grant that they have.
Would you anticipate that group might bring some goals or objectives to the board?
Sure. Yeah.
You know, maybe become part of our yearly goals or something
Sure,
like
yeah.
that.
That's where I feel like it kind of
Yeah.
gets into the wellness committees like wheelhouse.
And there's
Mhm.
plenty of room and time for that to be done there.
Mhm.
Matt, I sent you a note, I think this should maybe go to the ESP.
Wait a
Yeah.
minute.
Labor
Saw that.
management.
Wait a
You good with
minute.
that?
We can bring it there too.
Something
Yeah.
to do as well.
Yeah.
This is really sobering information.
Yeah.
It's well done, it's in depth, but it's
Mhm.
a little shocking.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
I think when you read through, there's definitely some areas where we could set some district goals, you know, and,
Mhm.
you know, probably don't try to solve all of them at once, but pick 2 or 3 of the big ones and
Mhm.
work on them.
Focus in. There's
Maybe,
some low
maybe
hanging
wellness
fruit,
committee
like what are
can,
some low hanging fruit and then
Yeah.
what are some
Well,
longer
Melissa took
term?
it over for me.
Yeah, no, that's.
You're on the wellness committee now?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Kept looking at you and
Yeah, and she's going, "Mhm."
Well, she.
That's a great idea. Load it up.
yeah, that's why you said, oh, there's plenty of margin.
oh,
There's plenty of margin on that
It
committee.
is.
That's why you said that. Okay, yeah.
And then she just giggles.
Some direction.
Just laughs.
Perfect.
No, and thanks to all the staff who took it. I mean,
Yeah,
because it becomes.
And it was- I mean, it was-
That take it.
wasn't just like a 5-minute deal. I mean,
No.
these 351 people committed significant amount of time to
yeah.
give us their opinion. So It'll be good to honor that
Let's
work
make
too.
it count.
Yeah, let's make it count.
Is there any further discussion tonight?
A lot of work tonight.
A lot of work. A lot of work.
Come on,
Any other,
let's find something else to talk about.
is there any other business to come before the board, Mindy?
I don't think so.
Work session's adjourned.
Thank you.
See you.
A lot of good work tonight.
And, even though like special ed, that it's always a long report, but there's so much information in there. I mean, and it has to get out.
Right, and she didn't even talk about quests. Like, I start looking at that, I'm like,
Right.
I'm like, I mean, there's just so